Hello, good morning. Hi, morning. Just testing my audio. Just making sure everyone is able to hear me clearly.
Hearing fine, Darren.
Okay. With an echo. All right, just give me 1 second. All right, is it better now? Hello? So I'm seeing your comments in the chat. Okay, good. So to the host, should I proceed? Are you going to do any, introductions or a kickoff possibly for this morning's session?
No, I think we're good to go.
Okay. All right. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to your next or your current HackTT live training session. So allow me to introduce myself. So my name is Darren Wickham. I'm a project manager here at Telio Systems Limited. I have 10 years of experience in the field of software development and 8 years of project management experience in both agile and waterfall projects, or let's say traditional projects. I'm also PMP certified, which says simply that I have some level of experience and some knowledge when it comes to project management, software development, and project execution. Just 1 second. All right, so this morning's agenda is as follows. Now I look back at some of the previous sessions and I saw on Friday participants would have been involved in a session that looked at selecting the right methodology for your project, whether it be agile or waterfall. And I think that's a very good place to start for this morning's session, simply because when you ask the question, what is a sprint and why and how do we use them, this is couched and based on a context of understanding waterfall and agile methodologies, but it also serves as setting the context for the importance of sprints and how they are used. So I know you went through some of this information and some of these details on Friday, but I guess doing this recap is always good to start off with, especially some of you are students, and having a refresher is always good so that we can get just a clear understanding before we introduce new material. All right, so I will start off by looking briefly at the waterfall model, followed by looking at some statistics related to projects and project management and project execution in general, followed by introduction to Agile, the methodology, and covering some key points related to it. Why sprints and Scrum benefits are two things that I'll be introducing when I'm talking about Scrum, as it's the sprints are the core or the heart of using Scrum, or the Scrum methodology, or the Scrum framework, as some might call it. So let me start off. I'm sure most of you know this particular model. So this is the waterfall methodology, and simply it's a phased sequential approach to software development, where the result from one phase acts as an input into the next phase in the sequence. So I know the language will change depending on your background, but this is a general sense of how the waterfall model proceeds when it comes to software development. So you have your analysis, and once that information is captured, it acts as an input into the design process, and that design process then, once completed, is going to generate some sort of document, some spec document that you could use as a guidance for development, and so forth and so forth. So you can see it's very sequential. It's one step after another. And the outputs trigger the start of the next process, or the next step in the process. But what is always interesting to me is the input from one person when it came to the waterfall model. So can anybody tell me who this person is? I'll just take a look at the chat. Perhaps some people may know him. I know it's a bit cloudy in terms of the image, but actually this is the best image I could find of this individual. Okay, so I'm seeing a note from Earl. Okay. Yes, so I'm seeing one yes and no. Yeah. All right, so some people are saying they don't recognize who this individual is. Okay, and that's fine. But he's actually Dr. Winston Royce, and he's I guess a fairly big player when it came to the introduction and the development of the waterfall methodology. He actually wrote a paper called Managing the Development of Large Software Systems. And within that paper, gives most of the details for the waterfall methodology. But I guess the interesting fact is that though he mapped out the sequence of activities when it came to executing using waterfall, he didn't mention a lot of pitfalls and a lot of negatives when it came to using that particular approach, which seems to me that a lot of people have forgotten. So he gave details, he gave, okay, these are the pitfalls, these are the things that you need to be concerned about when using this approach to develop large, complex software systems. And you'll hear me talk about the complexity of the software systems that people develop in general. Your systems and your projects and initiatives that you're undertaking right now for HackTT may be large and complex. So understanding the waterfall model in itself and understanding the pitfalls will allow you to be more effective when it comes to delivering on your projects. So he mentioned this in his paper, some of the pitfalls, some of the pros and cons. But as I said before, it seems that most of the industry or most of people, when they're talking and thinking about waterfall, they think simply about the benefits. It's sequential in nature, the flow of information, the ability to capture via documentation. But as I'll mention later, there's some level of detail that was overlooked in his paper. So what I'll do is I will just paste a link in the chat right now that you could use. And later on when the session is over, you can take a read and really familiarize yourselves with his approach and his logic behind waterfall and its uses. So having said that, so I posted the link in the chat, but there are some key takeaways and some key bits that I took out of his paper, which I wanted to bring to your attention and I wanted to highlight in this session. So the first one, he's speaking to testing, the testing phase. This could be internal testing, this could be usability testing, this could be user acceptance testing. So the testing phase, which occurs at the end of the development cycle, is the first event for which timing, storage, input and output transfers, etc. experience as distinguished from analyzed, which is quite concerning because what we are saying is this may be one of the first times that your potential stakeholders are interacting with the software that you may be developing. So the second point is the required design changes are likely to be so disruptive that the software requirements upon which the design is based and which provides a rationale for everything are violated. So we all know, and I'm sure it might have been mentioned in the session on Friday, as the project advances when you're using the waterfall methodology, it becomes more and more expensive to make changes. So he's speaking to some of the violations there, the fact that we are building this complex system, but there's a limited stakeholder interaction or limited customer interaction. So that is critical. So I've seen and been a part of projects where we have presented a project or presented our view or our implementation for a system to a prospective client, and their feedback is perhaps we missed something here, perhaps there's an issue that we need to iron out, there was something that they forgot to inform us of. So there are many instances where the requirements, though they've been extensively detailed, there are a lot of interviews, there are a lot of probing in the system or to solve a particular problem, and yet still we reach to the place where we're doing testing, and there are a lot of loopholes, there are a lot of areas where things could have been implemented differently. Now that the client is seeing something for the first time, they have a different take on it. Requirements are sometimes open to interpretation, so you as a developer or part of that team providing the software service, you interpreted a requirement one way, your customer or your stakeholder had a different interpretation. So something to pay attention to, and it will be something that we're looking at later on when we talk about agile and the methodologies that fall under that particular execution approach. So another interesting thing I wanted to mention would be some statistics as it relates to project management in general. So first question, and I guess I'll use this as an opportunity just to get some feedback in the chat. So the question, and this was sourced from the PMI 2018 Pulse of the Profession in-depth report that looks at the state of the industry as it comes to project management. And their question was, what percentage of all the projects within your organization this year had each of the following levels of complexity? So anybody who's willing to take, I guess, a guess? All right, so just wait maybe a second or two more. I'm seeing Keith is saying 75%. Okay. Anything from you, Bill, on that side? just a half maybe, okay? So let me reveal this stat here. So looking at high complexity projects, 41%, medium at 37, and low at 22. So we can see most of the projects undertaken by organizations across the world, or at least those who were polled, they're looking at and involved in projects of medium to high complexity, which speaks to the point I mentioned earlier, where you're using a possible methodology that does not cater to some of the inherent complexities of the project in itself. So let me just pull up another stat. So of the projects started in your organization in the past 12 months that were deemed failures, what were the primary causes of those failures? And the candidates were allowed to select up to 3 answers. And I'll just read the results. So if we look at the bottom, the largest pool, or the largest set of answers that were selected, we're looking at the top 3. So inaccurate requirements gathering, change in project objectives, and change in the organization's priorities. Right? So I spoke of this one to some extent in the previous slides. So we have inaccurate requirements gathering. So you went through the process of doing the requirements gathering, talking to customers, talking to users of the system, talking to stakeholders. You go ahead, you build the system, but yet still it doesn't satisfy all the requirements of that stakeholder group. Change in project objectives speaks to the fact that in some instances, you may start off with a project that is aimed at addressing a particular need or resolving a particular issue. But over time, as the business continues its daily operations, the objectives change. Same thing with the change in the organization's priorities. So both of them are somewhat interlinked. So the organization decides we are shifting from X to Y. But what happens is, in some instances, because of the methodology that we are using and some of the inflexibilities of the methodology itself, that shift is difficult to take place. So you're stuck in a process where you're building something that is no longer relevant for the organization that you're actually building for. Right, so with that, just going to do a brief introduction to Agile. So I know, as I said before, it was mentioned, so I'm just going to go through these things quickly. Right, so we all know it's an approach to product development that emphasizes early measurable return on investment through defined iterative delivery of product increments. So you're trying to get to the place where customers are involved and they are seeing progress as the thing evolves, as the product or the project or the thing moves forward. Second one is high visibility of project progress, allowing for early identification and resolution or monitoring of problems. So in instances where you produce something, let's say you are building a web page or you have a particular feature or bit of functionality that you're adding to a system, by it being visible and delivered to a client for review earlier, it gives you a chance to identify issues, identify problems, and find ways to quickly troubleshoot and resolve those issues and problems. So it speaks in the third one, continuous involvement of customer throughout the product development cycle, which is a stark contrast to waterfall, usually. So the waterfall approach, you might have some interactions early on in the project. So during the design, the analysis, you get feedback. There's a lot of back and forth between you and the customer or the stakeholders. But that tapers off once you get to development. So once you get to that phase, you're down in the work. You're actually trying to build this thing so that you can close off the development phase and move on to testing and getting customer feedback. But remember, we're saying, and we're speaking about complex systems. And let me just pause for a second and say, I'm not against waterfall as a methodology. I want to make sure that's explicit and clear. What I'm saying essentially is you need to be able to select the right methodology for your project based on the complexity of the solution that you're creating. So in some instances, waterfall might be totally fine because it's straightforward, it's to the point, it's something simple. In some instances, it might be a tool that you're building internally that is not going to be used by some external stakeholder, and that's fine. But in some instances, it's going to be something different. It's going to be something complex. And what we're saying here is the more complex the project, or the more complex the solution, there's a greater need for collaboration between you and the ones you're providing that solution to. And that's what this speaks to. Agile is speaking to continuous involvement of the customer throughout the project. So you are able to get feedback from them as you develop, rather than at key points in the development of the product or the project itself. So the third one, empowering business owners to make decisions needed to be good. So using Agile, they are able to prioritize, okay, based on what we've seen, we would like to see this thing next, as compared to waterfall, where they're saying everything is a priority. We want to see everything that you've captured in your specification document. When we're testing, we're going to have to test and go through all those requirements to ensure that you did what we asked. So they lose some control and some power in that place. But in the Agile approach, what we're saying is business owners, because of their continuous involvement, are now in a place where they can prioritize. They can say, we want you to build out this particular module or this particular feature first because we would like to use it as soon as possible. Or now that we've seen what you've developed, we like to deprioritize that and let's focus on something else. So that's empowering the business owner, or empowering your customers to be able to make those types of decisions. So the next one is adaptation to changing business needs, and it gives more influence over requirements changes, which is pretty consistent with the one before. And reducing product and process waste. So essentially, you're paring down your methodology to greater levels of efficiency so that you eliminate the waste. You eliminate some of the overhead that comes with a potential waterfall approach. So sometimes documentation, and I know it's something that we've worked on here at Telus, sometimes the documentation is so much that at some point it begins to lose its value. Because documentation is not something that is as valuable to a customer as working software. So the more time you spend in documentation and the less time you spend in development, mean that there's an issue, there's a skew between the two. Because clients are paying you for that working solution. They are not paying you for comprehensive documentation. So I just wanted to mention this as well. So Agile, the manifesto, as they call it, would be based on the following. So individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And I guess at this point, I will speak more to how you can use Agile and the methodology that I'll introduce called Scrum later on, how you can use it in your teams right now as you build out your project for HackTT. So the individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So oftentimes you've seen here, sometimes there's a process, or people are really hunkered down and they're fully invested in, okay, this is the process, these are the things that we need to do and we have to do. And these are the tools that you're going to use. So you have TFS, you have all the other development suites. And what we're saying here is individuals and the interactions between you and the members of your teams, between you and the stakeholders, is more important than the processes and the tools that you use. So I mentioned this before, working software over comprehensive documentation. The value, the thing that you're going after is that you want software that works. Your customer wants software that works. Comprehensive documentation, or sending a solution spec to a client and saying, okay, this is what we've done so far. Yes, you may need to do that from a point of diligence or due diligence, but understand that the key thing that you're going after as software developers, as analysts, based on, of course, the composition of your team, is clients at the end of the day, they're mostly interested in working software. Next one, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So this goes back to the waterfall approach. So what usually happens is when you reach to the point where a customer is seeing that solution in depth for the first time, one of the issues that you encounter is who's responsible for misinterpreting that particular requirement? Who is going to pay in terms of making that particular change? How long is it going to take? The contract stipulates these things, and we need to make changes. Who is going to compensate us for these changes? Who bears the weight of these changes that we're going to make to ensure that the product that we're delivering meets our goals right now? And notice I said right now. So we have different goals now. Who bears the weight of ensuring that the changes that we make meets those goals? And you'll be surprised to know that this is often a point of contention when it comes to project execution using waterfall. It's the fact that, okay, who is going to be responsible for those changes? And remember, I continue to stress, this is amplified as the complexity of the project increases. So this speaks to this one, the need for responding to change over following a plan. So changes are inevitable. They're always going to happen. These institutions, these organizations, they have their ecosystem. They operate in a context where business is always changing. Decisions are made. They have stakeholders who make their own decisions that may affect them. So one of the things that Agile caters to is the ability to respond to those changes. So a customer's request or priority for a customer 6 months ago may not be the same as it is today. So Agile allows you and gives you a channel and an avenue to be able to respond to those types of changes. But I want to note and I want to stress, while there's value in the items on the right, so the processes, the tools, the comprehensive documentation, contracts, and a plan, I'm stressing plan. I know developers have this approach. Let's just get into it. Let's do the work. Let's start writing code. Let's use this new framework. But stressing the planning part. And though there's a value in the items on the right, when you're talking about Agile, we're valuing the items on the left even more. Right. So with that, and I'm getting to it, so I know this is about sprints, but I felt we needed to create that context and have that brief review so that there's that understanding of the approach of using sprints and introduction of Scrum in itself. So Scrum is a methodology in that approach when you're speaking about Agile. So the Agile approach, Scrum is a methodology. There are other methodologies as well, but Scrum is one that is the most popular. There are others like Kanban and XP and whatnot. But Scrum is actually something that we use here at Telos. So we do have some experience when it comes to using Scrum. But when you ask the question about sprints, you're essentially asking about Scrum and the process and how it works. So Scrum is an Agile framework. So framework, methodology, people use it interchangeably. So assembly-less. So it's an agile framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems productively by creatively delivering projects of the highest possible value. Right, so it's founded on the theory of empirical process control. So for those who inquiring as to what it means by empirical, it means relying on or derived from observation and experiment, and it's guided by practical experience. So that's what Scrum is. It's a framework, a methodology that allows you to take the experiences and the observations into the problem solving. So using the experiences, the work that you're doing, using those experiences, you can enhance the product or the thing that you're building as things progress. So you're using that information that you had before, your previous sprints, which we'll get to, and relying on that information, relying on the feedback from the customer to be able to enhance your next sprint or the output of your next sprint. So let's look at some of the values. So these are the core values of any successful Scrum implementation. So focus. So Scrum is focused on delivering value or addressing a particular priority or concern at that point in time. It's not focused on the large overarching thing, though it's important, but at this particular time, Scrum is focused on delivering value right now. Courage. I will speak a bit about that as we go on. It requires greater levels of inquiry, maybe probing questions that you need to ask, things that you need to correct for you and your team and with your relationship with the stakeholder. Being able to show progress, and in some instances, it may not be progress that you're satisfied with, but courage means you're open, which speaks to the next value. Your openness when it comes to your approach to execution. So which is inherent to Scrum in itself. Commitment. So Scrum is also based on that thing where once you commit, within reason of course, you are driving to get that next increment or that next feature out, next set of features. You're committed to providing value to your customers. You're not focused on the other things that may come down the road or later on. What your focus is on you're committed to delivering this X amount of functionality, this X amount of features, and driving that commitment. So respect. So some of these things will happen between you and your stakeholders and those who you're working with, but some of these things apply to your team as well. So your core team, the developers and the analysts and the perhaps Scrum Masters and persons you're working with. So let's look at the team structure. So it may be a bit different for you, as I said. So essentially, let me just pull up my laser. You have your stakeholders here, and stakeholders might be represented by a business owner. This is just a title that I gave this person, but this person essentially represents the stakeholders. So think about the government initiatives or the cases that the government presented before you. You may have a point person who you are speaking to with the ability to answer your questions, address your concerns, and basically shape what your solution is meant to do, and whether your solution is actually hitting the target when it comes to solving that particular problem. We have the product owner, which might be somebody on your team who has the most knowledge about that particular problem or the particular solution that you're building. What is the thing that you're trying to solve? The Scrum Master will be the person who is responsible for removing impediments, things that affect the team, but they're also responsible for looking at the team's performance. This might not happen if you're using, or you might not need this person to say, if you're doing Scrum on your projects right now. That might be a responsibility that you all share because your teams might be smaller. I'm not sure of the configurations. So use what you will to adapt this methodology to your approach to execution. And of course, you have the development team, which will comprise of the testers, the actual developers, analysts, those persons who are responsible for actually implementing or crafting the solution, the actual writing of code and the writing of text that goes on the site or the communications that needs to go alongside the solution itself. So we come to why sprints, but before I do, I'll just pause for a second. Let's check the time. And do we have any questions thus far? Okay, I'm seeing two. Okay, so those two are pulled and some feedback. Right, so Earl is asking an excellent question. So his comment was, had a project failed last couple semesters and got a project management course recommended for me. Do you guys do mandatory daily communication, like daily hustle meetings in the morning? How important is daily communication? So excellent question, Earl, and I'll get to it shortly. So the following slides in this presentation would speak to exactly what you're referring to, which we call daily stand-ups. All right, so we're asking a question then, why sprints? Just 1 second. So why sprints? So sprints are time-box periods during which the Scrum team commits to produce a usable and potentially shippable product increment. So key things to note here would be time-boxed periods and the outcomes, which is usable and potentially shippable product increments. All right, so time box means that the time that you set for your sprint is actually fixed. So if you are doing sprints that are of 2 weeks, you want to keep your sprints consistent at 2 weeks. You're not going to do a 2-week sprint, then followed by a 3-week sprint, then a 4-week sprint, and go back to 2 weeks. Essentially, the benefit of having time box periods allows you to predict the level at which your team could do work within that sprint. And that, coming out of that, produces the usable and potentially shippable product increment. So by keeping it fixed, by having a set amount of hours of work that you could dedicate to this particular project or this particular product, you are able to know, okay, the team has 50 hours to allocate towards a sprint. And remember, I'm trying to apply it to your particular situation and the projects that you guys are working on. You don't want to deviate and change that, okay, I'm going to have 50 hours, and then, okay, next week we're going to say I'm going to contribute 100 hours. Yes, perhaps you can do that, but having a baseline for the amount of hours that you're going to contribute to executing on sprints means that over time, you're going to get a clear idea of how much you could produce sprint by sprint. And that allows you to time your engagement with your customers and your stakeholders and it allows you to gauge exactly what you can actually do, what you can actually accomplish during a sprint. So in order to get to that place where we're looking at sprints, we look at some of the ceremonies surrounding the sprint. So we have here sprint planning. And of course, this is a pretty condensed overview of sprints and of Scrum in general. So some details you may need to go ahead and just do some reading. I'm sure you might have mention of this methodology in your textbooks, or you could of course find information online. But I'm just giving you a just oversight into the process. So you have sprint planning. So sprint planning is where the team gets together with the product owner, with the person who is able to give guidance and say, these are the priority things that we would like to see. These are the things that we think you should focus on next. And remember, that could be a person on your team who is liaising with potential stakeholders, people you have identified as those who have information on that particular use case or problem that you're trying to solve. And together, you will determine what are the requirements, what we also call PBIs, product backlog items. I'll get to that shortly. But essentially, product backlog items these are the requirements that we would like to see, or we need to have met in order for this thing to be built correctly. Daily stand-up meetings. So Earl was asking about daily stand-up meetings. So yes, one of the things that we have would be meetings that you have. So let's say you have a sprint that's 5 days. So I'm putting it in the context of a student. So let's say you and your team, members of your team, you meet on Monday and you plan, okay, these are the requirements that we feel we should look at or focus on in this sprint. And once you've established that and you set what's the goal for the sprint itself, every day, what you're doing is you're having a daily stand-up. You're having a meeting, which is short, about 15 minutes or so, which speaks to what are you working on, or what you worked on yesterday, what are you working on today, and what are the issues you're encountering. And by answering those 3 questions, you're able to identify issues or things that may be affecting the team when it comes to completing the requirements or implementing the requirements and meeting the goals and objectives of that sprint. So you have your daily startup meeting. You're going to do it every day for the sprint period. So let's say you have 2 weeks and you've decided we're going to do this thing for 2 weeks. Every day you're going to have a stand-up meeting, usually around 15 minutes, which you're going to speak to those 3 questions. What you did yesterday, what you're doing today, and what are the issues that you've encountered. What usually happens is you're able to give other members of your team insight into your process and the things that you're responsible for building. And also it highlights to the team what are some of the issues that you're encountering. And together, by highlighting those issues, together you're able to find a way. Well, firstly, you have identified and you're able to go about and find ways to resolve those issues. So for, let's say, a student team, you guys might want to meet every night around 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock or at school and go through the notion of, okay, these are the things I worked on yesterday. These are the things I worked on today. And these are the things that are giving me problems. These are the things that are causing conflicts for me. All right. Then we have the sprint review. So once the sprints are finished, the team again gets together with the product owner, with the person who's able to say, you're on the right path. I like how this feature has been implemented. I like these requirements. this thing is not quite as I've seen it, or I like to have it implemented. And using, I guess, that feedback, the team is able to assess together with the product owner. That's in fact, okay, what I want, I may prioritize this because I don't feel it's important anymore. I mean, like us to spend some more time in the next sprint looking at this particular feature, or something was incomplete when it came to implementation, and we may need to spend part of the next sprint doing that polishing or that work to have that particular requirement fulfilled and completed. So that's where the sprint reviews come in. And the last ceremony would be the sprint retrospective, where the team is looking at how they performed over the period and finding ways to improve their performance. So simple things about communication, or missing stand-up meetings, or having some difficulties with understanding the requirements and how they're written, making sure that they're clear and concise. All those are things that may come up in a retrospective, where the team together could find solutions and ways of addressing. So going into the next sprint, you now have a better context and a better platform for improved performance. That those things that you identified in the retrospective, once you come up and you implement those solutions, should no longer be an issue in the subsequent sprint. All right. So we have the ceremonies, and let's move on to the artifacts. So we have two artifacts when it comes to Scrum and sprints. So you have the product backlog and the sprint backlog. So think of the product backlog as that long list of requirements, that set of features and functionality that you need to implement for stakeholders to be satisfied, which is different from the sprint backlog, which is a subset of the items found in the product backlog. So the product backlog is ordered based on priority. So the highest priority items will be found at the top, and as things progress downward in the product backlog, you would see those items are lower priority. So what happens is during sprint planning, and I will give you guys a view of everything when we put it together. During sprint planning, together with the product owner, together with those making the decisions, you are able to take items, usually the highest priority items, from the product backlog, and you're putting it into your sprint backlog. And your sprint backlog will be the requirements you are committing to fulfilling for that particular sprint. Okay, so it speaks to one of the values we said before, where you spoke of commitment. So over time, as things progress, items will be moved from the product backlog once they're completed, and they moved into the sprint backlog, they're completed, and once those items are removed, items that were further down in the list, which had a lower priority, are moved up to the top, and they become the new items that are highest priority. And that cycle continues as we move from sprint to sprint. Right? So one of the questions you guys may be asking is, okay, but how do we determine how much work we can actually tackle or do or complete in a sprint? And that's where story pointing comes in. So story pointing is a unit of measure for expressing an estimate of the overall effort that would be required to fully implement a requirement. So the estimated effort associated with completing the work is based on complexity, uncertainty, and risk. So essentially what happens, and there are two ways of going about assessing the efforts associated with the requirements that you're adding to a sprint. The first is called, I guess, general story pointing. And you guys may need to research this a bit. What you're doing is you are using the Fibonacci scale. And the Fibonacci scale allows you to apply an effort, which is simply as it says there on the screen, is a unit of measure for estimating the complexity and the uncertainty of implementing this particular requirement or this particular product backlog item, as I mentioned before. All right, so do some research into the Fibonacci scale, and it's going to show you that that scale is used to assess the requirements in terms of the components that we mentioned at the bottom. And using that, you're going to be assigning a value to each of the requirements. And why it's done this way is usually working with developers, a developer might say, okay, so this requirement is going to take or require me to work for 12 hours of work. But we all know the nature of software development, that it's a strange beast, it's volatile, and sometimes things don't go as we planned. So you're working on a database, there's some issues that you encountered, you're using the Graph API, there's a bug in the Graph API that you're using when you're building that database. So there are a set of complexities and uncertainties that you can't estimate for with that 12-hour estimate that you provided. So by using story pointing, what you're doing is you're saying, yes, time is important, but using that scale, I am catering to these three values, the complexity, the uncertainty, and the risk. And once you do that for the stories or the product backlog items, and you're able to get a clear sense of, okay, over time, we are able to work on these items that amount to this amount of value, then you're going to develop that cadence that you'll be able to know as a team, okay, we can do a sprint where we could do 25 units of work. And of course, the sum is going to differ depending on the different requirements. So that's story pointing. There's also another way of going about doing the estimation, which is t-shirt sizing. So you could look that up as well. So speaking to Earl's point, as I wrap up, so daily stand-ups, which is core to a successful sprint. It's a short time box meeting, purpose with providing quick timely updates to team members regarding progress, plans, and challenges and pitfalls. And I want to restate, this is not meant to solve the team's issues, but to draw attention to them. So you may have a particular issue that the team needs to address. Usually what you would do is you would highlight these issues or take note of them. You have your stand-up meeting, and then following that meeting, for those persons who are the particular problem or issue is relevant to, you can get together and find a way to solve that particular issue. So for example, an analyst might not need to be involved in resolving an issue that's code related because they might not have that expertise or experience with writing code. All right. So this is another key thing when we're talking about sprints. The definition of done. So the definition of done is a shared understanding of the expectations that software must live up to in order to be releasable into production with the purpose of providing transparency over the software created. So essentially, the definition of done speaks to the fact that when you say a feature or a bit of functionality or PBI is done, it's in fact done. And that could vary depending on what the team agrees on. It means that your code is checked in. It means that you've written your unit tests. It means that it has been deployed to a production environment, it means that it has passed quality assurance. So I know there was a session earlier that spoke to QA and the importance of QA. So the definition of done, what that prevents is when you say something is done, it's in fact done. You have done all the things necessary to ensure that that particular thing or that particular set of features are demonstrable, that they have met the standards set by the team, and they in fact are done, and you can move on to the next thing. All right, so I know it may be somewhat confusing. I hope it was clear enough, but let me just show this, and this is what the process looks like once we put the various bits together. So we have at the start the inputs and updates from the Scrum team and the stakeholder, and that goes into the product and the service owner. So the product owner, as I mentioned before, and this person is responsible for guiding the solution, ensuring that the right requirements are delivered at the right time, that priority is set. And once this is done, so you can see here, you can think of those blocks in the back as the work items in what we said was the product backlog. And you move on to the Scrum team, which would be developers and other members of the team, the testers, analysts, and they go about doing sprint planning. So we have the planning for the sprint where you're looking at the highest priority items, you're identifying what's the effort associated, can it fit into the sprint, what is achievable, and once the team agrees, you move into the actual sprint, right? And you have this cycle here, which is a sprint. You have your daily stand-up meetings. You have your review and retrospective at the end of the sprint, where stakeholders and contributors are there to provide feedback, usually through the product owner. And so you can see this is a cycle here. You can repeat this as many times as needed to get to a place where you're satisfied with the product that you're saying is going to market or final, or this is the first release, the first major shippable release. And then, of course, on this side, you have the shippable product. So I mentioned it briefly earlier. At the end of every sprint, what you want to have is some feature or a group of features or functionality that's demonstratable. Hence the reason why sprints, it's recommended that you usually restrict them between 2 and 4 weeks. So it's short enough to demonstrate progress, and it's not too long that you are packing in and completing a large volume of work without stakeholder and product owner feedback. All right. So we just summarize some of the benefits. So we see that Scrum essentially reduces risk by increasing visibility. So there's involvement from your customers, the product owner, stakeholders. They are able to see things in increments as they are developed and reach that shippable state. It improves adaptability. So you're able to respond to the demands of those stakeholders. Early and continuous delivery by working in your sprints and engaging your customers, your stakeholders. You're able to compartmentalize the functionality and produce shippable elements or increments that could be used and reviewed by those stakeholders. And over time, once you get that cadence, you're able to do so continuously. Increase quality, because rather than looking at this entire huge complex system, you're biting off smaller bits. So you have greater control, you have smaller components to work on, and you have better cost control, if that were a factor. So you're able to say at this point, okay, we have done 12 sprints, we believe this is enough functionality to get to market. And of course, increased collaboration between stakeholders and the team and the individuals on that team, the Scrum and the product owner, Scrum Master and the team as well. So, I believe that's it for my session. I know it's 10 o'clock. So, I'll just take some time, let me just check the comments here. Okay, all right, so I'm seeing the posted a question, so let me just end here, and then I'll get on to the questions. So essentially what we're saying is Agile and Scrum, sprints. It's about learning, it's about adapting, it's about improving, and it's about delivering. Okay, so first question would be, how do you get everyone on board with the same vision? People end up with different ideas of what they're building, what they are building. I have also had issues with people keeping ideas to themselves in the past. So I understand you. Essentially, what it boils down to is the prioritization. So essentially, everyone is going to be able to speak to and contribute to the thing being built by adding product backlog items, adding requirements to that backlog we spoke of earlier. And the team together, there has to be some agreement when it comes to prioritization. That usually comes from the product owner. And as I said before, the product owner might represent a larger group, but it has to be consensus as to, okay, these are the priority things. So the vision, you should have a clear idea of what you're trying to build. The issue is going to come in is at the rate at which you're building or what is delivered first. The vision, that's something that you may need to treat with outside of this particular methodology. And simply it means having a meeting or having sessions with key stakeholders to get a fair understanding of, okay, this solution is meant to achieve this particular objective. And once you have that thing clearly articulated and identified, it then informs what are the features you're going to build out, what are the prioritizations associated with those features as well. So I'm seeing, second question would be, if there's no Scrum Master, how would you handle accountability? So yeah, that's a good question. So I would just like to point out that the team is not necessarily accountable to the Scrum Master. The team is accountable to each other. So remember when I spoke about the Scrum values and courage being one of them, you are accountable to each other. So that's where the openness comes in as well. So if you have issues or you're spotting, this person is having a lot of difficulty with this particular requirement or this particular item, but they're not saying. In these stand-ups and in general, because you're committing to the values of Scrum, you're supposed to be comfortable with saying, why are you working on this particular thing for 3 days straight? Do you need help? Is there the Scrum Master is there to be processed, but some of the responsibility lies on members of the team as well, where they too have to be able to spot issues and bring them to the forefront. So next question from me would be, how would we get a final say in how to proceed if an agreement is not met? And I guess I'm sorry when it comes to that point, but at the end of the day, when it comes to agreement, yes, there's consensus, but at some point, somebody has to be able to make a final decision on the direction. Yes, there's collaboration, there's feedback. You want to get the opinions of various people. But part of it would be where perhaps the product owner needs to step in and say, this is the direction that we're going in. So that person has the greatest sense of what it means for this thing to be successful. They have the greatest understanding of the use case or the problem that you're trying to solve. And they essentially are the ones guiding the team and saying, this is what we need to build in order for our stakeholders to be satisfied. So I think that's it for the questions. 10:05, not bad on time. But I think that's it for me. I hope this was clear. As I said, you may need to do some additional reading. I only had an hour to be able to prepare the material. But for those interested, it's not going to be a straight application based on your team configuration, your interactions with those who might be giving you insights into the particular problem that you're trying to solve. But I hope that you could take some elements of the process, maybe daily stand-ups, maybe the values, and use that to improve performance of your team, or even to better understand what's the problem that you're trying to solve based on getting feedback from your stakeholders. So thanks everyone. Have a good day.
All right, great. Thanks, Darren. So everybody will be back here in an hour. And that being said, thanks for coming out.